Hello and welcome to the second lecture for Word 111. Um, I'm assuming that you guys have read all the stuff, so we're just going to jump right into this idea of rhetoric. But before I really get into this, I want to mention that this, the way I'm presenting this to you guys today is in a way that's similar to what you guys will be looking to do for your pitch presentation itself. This is being brought to you by PresentationTube, which sounds like a really weird name, but it's a good way to record both yourself giving a presentation with a webcam and the PowerPoint slides at the same time. But you could also use Novio.com or Zentation.com as well. These are online web apps. So the links to these should be in your prompt, but if you have any questions, let me know. So I just want you guys to get a sense of what it looks like. So before we go in, so let's go ahead and get into what the rhetorical situation is. So rhetoric, or the rhetorical appeals, just as a refresher, most of you have probably seen this in your Composition and Communication 1 class, but they basically come down to three main things. You have pathos, logos, and ethos. Okay, and this is from your book, so if you need a refresher, go ahead and go back to that. But pathos is the sensation of the argument. Most people think about it in terms of emotion, but again, pathos can have to do with even something like the speed with which you are moving through something. So if I give a speech, but I speak very quickly, then the pathos will be anxiety, or there'll be a rushed pathos that will shape how my audience takes it. So the other side of this is logos, which is what most people think about, which is the core of the argument. This is where you have stuff like deductive reasoning, where you are taking a main principle and reducing it down to the specific situation that you're looking at, or inductive reasoning, where you look at a lot of facts and figures and you figure out, oh, this is because this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, I can say this about the larger issue. All right, now logos is going to play an important role in a lot of the stuff that we look at this semester, including your pitch presentation, because you're going to want to prove, or show rather, to your audience why the public debate that you're looking at is so important. And one way to do that is to use something like inductive reasoning. So this is happening, and this is happening, and that's why this is so important. Or to look at it through deductive reasoning and say, this is a core value of America, or of University of Kentucky campus, or whatever, and is being violated by this, or it's being questioned by this public controversy. Okay, so it's something to think about. And then the one that's often overlooked is ethos. And ethos just basically has to do with the credibility, or the character, or persona, as your book puts it, of the rhetor. And rhetor is just a fancy way to say person making an argument. So the speaker, or the writer, or whatever. So the character has to do with your credibility, whether or not you are trustworthy on that topic, or so you can prove your credibility through citations and stuff like that, or you can prove it by a reputation. Okay. Sometimes this persona or character is stuff that we don't have to really necessarily prove. So if I want to make an argument about, let's say, the benefits of shaving your head instead of faking like you have hair, then you can see my bald head, and I probably can speak on this. Same with a lot of like different things based off of the way you look. So when we say credibility, it's earned credibility, but it's also, some of it is built into stereotypes. And so ethos can be a double-edged sword, but you want to pay attention to it and either build up your credibility, or by showing how passionate you are about the topic, or relying on your background and showing your audience what your background is, so that they can understand why you have the authority to speak on this. So the other thing I want to talk about from that first chapter on the basics of rhetoric is this idea of stasis heuristics. Okay, if you remember from the book, it's kind of a hidden away paragraph, but I recommend you finding a definition of heuristics is a way to generate ideas. So stasis is a way to understand that that the people discussing or debating a topic, deliberating on a topic, as the book says, I think, are talking about the same thing. And this is a way to kind of, if you follow this hierarchy down, then you have a way to figure out where exactly the disagreement is. And so you can look at that as the point at which you are going to debate something. All right, so you have your questions of fact. Is it real? Does it exist? You know, big hot button issue is global warming. Still is, has been for the last 20 years. And a lot of people are still discussing whether or not it actually exists, whether it's happening, or whether it's a problem, I guess. Some people still say that the world is heating up, but it's just a cyclical nature. Most scientists would disagree with that, but you know, that's where a debate is happening, a public debate. You have questions of definition. What is it composed of? What is it called? So for instance, just to choose another hot topic, and by the way, if your project or public debate is one of these hot topics, they're probably going to push you away from it because the camps are pretty entrenched. But questions of definition, you have stuff like abortion debates. There's a lot of questions about definition of what exactly constitutes murder, depending on who you talk to, and where the quality of life of the mother starts to diminish compared to the quality of life of the infant. And it doesn't matter where you stand on this issue, the debate when it comes to abortion basically has to do with questions of definition, and definition of what's moral and immoral is included in that. Questions of quality, is it important, is it serious, is it good or bad, just or unjust. If you look at a lot of the debates in the presidential election right now, they have a lot of these are questions of quality, questions of cause and effect. You guys understand that. And questions of proposal, what should we do? And by the time that we end the semester, we should be on to talking about proposals or arguing about what should be done about your public debate. And that's what we're aiming towards. So as we go through this semester, we're going to move further and further down this heuristics, or this stasis questions. In fact, right now where your project pitch will probably resolve around either a question of fact or a question of definition, as in maybe a question of quality, is it important? But you're trying to define what this public debate is and how and why it's important. So now to jump into what most of this lecture is about, and that's this idea of rhetorical situation. Now, this is the definition that Beitzer gives, and it's in your textbook if you wanted to open it up and look at that. It's rhetorical situation may be defined as a complex of persons, events, objects, and relations presenting an actual or potential exigence. Okay, and I'm going to stop there and just kind of backtrack and let you know what's going on here. So this complex of persons, events, objects, and relations, this is just talking about all the things that are involved in what we call the rhetorical situation. All right, so when we talk about it, we talk about the people involved, the speaker or the writer or the audience, okay? The events, okay, what inspired or what started this conversation or this argument. What are some of the relationships that we're talking about between the speaker and the audience, or between the people involved in the inciting incident, okay? And then presenting an actual or potential exigence, and that's an important distinction in that we can often argue about things that aren't actually important, like problems right now. So, for instance, a lot of stuff. A lot of books have been written about the potential of alien life forms. Well, we don't know if that's a real problem, how to deal with that encounter, but we've written tons of books about the potential exigence of what's going on here. So which can be completely or partially removed if discourse. Okay, so the idea of exigence is this is the problem, and it completely or partially removed. So whether or not the problem can be solved, or at least work towards solving, if discourse or discussion introduced into the situation can so constrain human decision. Okay, so can so constrain meaning narrow or focus human decision or action as to bring about the significant modification of the exigence. It's a lot of jargon in there. You don't need to completely understand what's going on, but it's useful to look at this and take a look at it after we've talked about this a little bit more. And it might start to make more sense. They're gonna Bytes or speaks in these terms as a way to take away some of the confusion about what's going on in the field of rhetorical studies. We aren't deep in that field. We're just, starting to dip our toes into it. So you don't have to worry about understanding everything that's involved there. One way to look at this is that a rhetorical situation is just a way to describe the context surrounding a rhetorical argument. Okay, so that includes the problem, the problem that's being argued about, the person making the argument, and I'm using argument in a very broad sense, not like an actual like disagreement, but what are you trying to prove or trying to show? The person making the argument, the people listening to the argument, and the context in which the argument is set. So these are all the things that can kind of define this idea of what a rhetorical situation is. So before we go into the situation in more depth, I wanted to, you may have heard of this before, but I wanted to introduce something called the rhetorical triangle, which is something that this man named Wayne Booth introduced a while ago as a way to understand what's going on when you write. Okay, so he meant it specifically in terms of writing, but what he's talking about is this idea of this is the relationship that you're always paying attention to when you're looking at a text or a composed text, so whether that's a speech or an essay or whatever. And that is the rhetor or the writer or speaker and his relationship or her relationship with the audience. Okay, that's an important relationship to understand when you're trying to figure out how to talk about this subject. So obviously, if you're writing an essay, then the writer's relationship with the subject is important, as in the thesis statement and all that stuff. But you also want to pay attention to this relationship between the audience and the subject, because you want to make sure that they understand what you're talking about. Okay, so you want to make sure that you are credible. All right, so this would be ethos. You want to make sure that your audience understands what's going on. That'd be logos. All right, and then your opinion or your relationship to the topic can have an interaction with the sensation of it or the pathos. Okay. So, sorry, I meant to skip ahead. So you can see how these relationships kind of all balance out, which is why we tend to look at this as a whole unit, not just look at the rhetor's relationship to the audience, but look at it in terms of the triangle. Okay, and then when you bring in the audience, you're bringing in all the stuff that the audience knows and how it goes along with what you know. Okay, whether about the subject or about whatever, the references that you make and that sort of thing. So we look at an audience. Your book mentions this. There are basically two types. You have your general public. Okay, this is the type of audience that's addressed by local news broadcasts. Okay, like WKYT. They're talking to people in the Lexington area. They're not really focused in most of the time on a specific target audience. But when you have cable news and all this proliferation of different types of news channels, then they tend to try to get a very specific target audience, because they'll get more people if they can convince them to pay attention to their news broadcast instead of this general news broadcast. So we have obviously Fox News as more of a Republican focused target audience in the way they talk about current events. And then you have, even with the slogan lean forward, you can see, if you don't know already, that MSNBC is a little bit more towards the left, towards the Democratic side with their target audience. But it doesn't have to just be left, right, or a binary. You can add in other things. So for instance, Vice News, they tend to aim their coverage of the news towards a younger audience. So it's not necessarily about Republican or Democrat, although Vice News tends to be more liberal in their presentation. It's mainly, their target audience is mainly towards a younger demographic. And then you have E! News, and they're not ideological at all. They cover entertainment news. They cover, you know, what happened with the latest thing with the Kardashians or whatever. So it's not a specific, or it's not left right. It's they decided they want to cover this news to meet this audience's needs. So you have this idea of target audience as far as who you're trying to hit, who you're trying to aim your argument at or your meaning towards. I've included a couple other things as well. You have your implied audience as well. And this goes back to this idea of the rhetorical triangle. The implied audience is who you may be writing for a larger audience, but the way you talk about that larger audience, and your book talks about this as well, will kind of shape how you see them and how you see that general public. And that's where the implied audience comes in. And if you're trying to analyze what's going on, it's useful to know, who do they think the general public is? And that's who is implied. Okay, so you know, it's just a useful thing to think of. And then tailored audience is just a way to think about target audiences that are very specific, and they're designed just for that. And you can see this in a lot of public speeches where you only want to bring in people that are going to match what you're targeted at. So there's not this larger group involved as well. So anyways, these are some questions, and this is in your book, to help you think about audience. And we're going to talk about audience a lot more next week, but this is a nice starting point to try to get a sense of this. And what you might think of for your project pitch presentation is think about answering these questions in terms of your classmates. Okay, we don't have a physical class, so you haven't met these men and women, but they are UK students and they are taking this class. So what level of familiarity do they have with this subject? Maybe not a ton, so you might have to deal with that, okay? What age? Well, it might be varied in here, but you can have an implied guess at what's going on as far as age and try to write towards that, okay? So think about these questions in terms of your classmates, and that might help you think about how to use your knowledge of your audience to impact the message that you make, but also to understand the rhetorical situation of your project pitch. Okay, so when we still have the rhetorical triangle involved in this situation, but you bring in, when you talk about the situation itself, the context around it and what's going on around this text as a way to understand the situation as a whole. And in doing that, the first thing you want to pay attention to in the context is what your book calls the exigence, what also might be called telos. Okay, the exigence is the problem or the reason someone is speaking. Okay, why, in terms of your project pitch, why do you think that this is an important debate that needs to be paid attention to? That's your exigence. Okay, the subject is the debate, but why does it matter? Why is it important? Why should we look deeper into it? That would be the exigence. Okay. Telos is also called purpose. Okay, so you can think of exigence as your motivation or your purpose behind why you're putting together the video or why you're writing the essay or whatever. Okay. And I just want to point this out. Another way to talk about a rhetorical situation is kairos or kairos. It's just, I keep giving you ethos, pathos, and logos. I might as well give you the Greek name for this as well. When talking about the exigence, your book mentions this. It's when a rhetorical situation comes into existence, the minute we perceive the need for a problem to be solved, and that's what the exigence is: the need for a problem to be solved. This need, this motivation, it allows you to it allows a rhetorical situation to come about because that's the foundation. It doesn't matter who the audience is if we're not paying attention to a problem. It doesn't matter what constrains the rhetor if we're not paying attention to a problem. The relationship between the audience and the rhetor is it comes about because they're sharing a focus on a similar problem or similar exigence. So when your book calls it a catalyst for a rhetorical situation, that's what they mean. It allows a rhetorical situation to come about, this motivation or this need for a problem to be solved. Okay, and as I said, it defines this relationship. Okay, because we might look at the relationship between the subject and the audience, as it's important to keep that in mind. But the whole reason that there is a discussion, or there is a text or a video or whatever, is because the rhetor has a reason to talk to the audience. There is a reason why the author of an essay is speaking to their audience. There's a reason that your presentation is going to your classmates. It has to do with this exigence. There is some problem that needs to be talked about. Okay, so this relationship is important and is shaped by the exigence. Okay. The last thing to talk about is this idea of constraints. And constraints can seem like something that's hard to get your head around. I know I struggled with it for a little bit, because if it's constraining the argument, then why not just switch it around? But this is not necessarily a bad thing. These constraints can actually help focus a speaker or a writer, and it can actually help the audience understand what's going on a little bit better. Okay, so your constraints are those external factors which would impact the message's success that aren't the speaker or the audience. So it's not like, we don't talk about constraints in terms of your own approach to the pitch or your audience's interpretation of the pitch. If we want to look at that, we're going to look at what the audience is doing or what the rhetor is doing. But in terms of understanding rhetorical constraints, or the constraints on the rhetorical situation, we're talking in terms of genre. Okay, we're talking in terms of material, as in what is around that the rhetor can take advantage of, or that the audience can take advantage of in order to understand the text. And we're talking cultural constraints. And when I say that these constraints can actually be generative or help the argument along, one way to look at that is in terms of how a genre can help us think about what's going to happen next. So we have expectations. All right. So for instance, if I'm watching an action movie and there's a message in that action movie, it's hard to think of one that has a really profound message, like as far as argument, but there are some out there. Let's take Fast and Furious and the idea of family. If you've seen those movies, then this idea of the genre of the action movie is going to push the audience into being more involved in what's going on, because they think, they have expectations about what an action movie is going to be, and they pay attention to what's happening in these relationships because we expect to pay attention to that and under the stress of whatever situation is in an action movie. The idea of material constraints in terms of how something is presented and how we take it in. Okay, that also, and your book points this out, has to do with genre. So a video is going to have different ways of reaching me than an essay or a novel or whatever. One thing that I want to mention, is why we have this picture here, is South Park. And South Park is a great, they have ridiculous arguments, and as far as the rhetorical approach that's involved in this, but the way they mess with genre and in terms of, it's a cartoon show, and it's a cartoon show that doesn't have a ton of money invested in great animation. So there are a lot of material and genre constraints involved in South Park, but they use that to their advantage. One way to look at this is some of the issues that they explore would not have anything to do with 4 middle school boys, all right? But because they mess with that and they start exploring issues that are well beyond the concerns of middle school students, we have a way to bend these constraints and violate and break the constraints so that we can make a point even more effective. And that's something to consider. And when you're putting together, for instance, the issue-based website, how do you want to actually conform to the needs of a website, as far as this is what we expect when we log on to a website. But then how might you violate those genre conventions of what a website looks like in order to make your point a little more forcefully. So in terms of the pitch, you might not want to mess with it too much as far as breaking these constraints, but it's something to keep in mind for the future. So this is just a greater sense of what's going on with the rhetorical situation. And while this might be complex, this whole idea, I hope that it's a little clearer to you what is involved with this now. And I hope that that definition makes a little more sense if you take another look at it. I did want to talk a little bit before I in this lecture by talking about the project pitch presentation in a little more specific detail. So when you're looking at this, what you're going to do is I want you to think about how the rhetorical situation of this pitch, what's going on with that to help you write an effective, persuasive speech. So when you're looking at that, you're looking at who your audience is. Your audience is your, here, I'll just go ahead and bring this up. Your audience is your classmates. Okay, that's who you're trying to convince. You're trying to convince these people that this is important so that your public debate or your topic ends up being the focus of a much more in-depth research project, which is the rest of the semester. Okay. Your exigence is, what is this public debate and why is it important? All right. The reason this debate should be examined is the topic. Obviously, you're the rhetor. And then you're constrained by the assignment prompt. Okay. You have 4 to 5 minute video presentation. You have sources that you need. You're going to need a PowerPoint presentation, and you need to record yourself giving that PowerPoint presentation. So this can seem like a very constrictive thing, but think about how to use that to your advantage, or what kind of conventions go along with a video presentation that you could take advantage of. All right, so this is something to consider, and if you have any questions about this, please let me know. Or if you just want to shoot some ideas by me about what, how you can use the genre of this presentation to your advantage. I'm happy to answer those questions or talk to you more about this in office hours or via email. And if you have any questions about this, please let me know. I appreciate those that have gone ahead and started commenting on your classmates' pitch ideas, their project ideas. Make sure that you do that. It'll really help each other out, and you'll get a sense of what your classmates are thinking about, which might also help you put together this presentation. And if you have any questions, please let me know. And good luck, and I'll see you guys in the future, or I'll talk to you guys soon.